One of the approaches that we saw in Japan throughout the 1990s was huge spending on infrastructure projects, for example. Government bond issuing massively increased during that period. Is Keynesian economics. Some of the policies that we see in America, in Britain, elsewhere around the world are focusing on a similar stimulation through infrastructure spending and so on. Are these policies sound, or, like Japan has done, will we be building up further problems for the future?
Yeah, if fiscal policy is not funded the right way, if it's done the traditional way, and in Britain that so far is the case, you are storing up bigger problems because you're just getting the government more indebted. Basically the bubble that preceded the bust banking system was excess debt creation, and you're now creating more debt. And you're not addressing the problem of lack of credit creation because fiscal policy doesn't create credit. In fact, any fiscal spending will crowd out the private sector because every pound that the government takes by issuing bonds, as it does now to fund fiscal spending, takes from the economy. It will re-inject it, and there will be a transfer and perhaps a more efficient use, maybe, but you will not increase credit creation. Therefore, you will not get any growth out of this at all. And that's exactly what we've seen in Japan. I did some empirical work there, and it was perfect one-to-one crowding out of private demand by fiscal policy. So that's the threat, and basically you need to link fiscal policy to credit creation. The best policy would be to stop the issuance of government bonds immediately and get the government to borrow from banks. Then you get bank credit creation. Better still, not to create any debt at all, because this would still create debt, but it would also at least create credit creation, would be the issuance of government money. And thereby there will be no debt creation. This is something that happened, for example, under John F. Kennedy in the 60s. He issued United States notes. And it has happened in the Meiji period in Japan. And currently there are some politicians discussing this. I mean, I've said this since the early 90s. Because this way you can increase the money supply without, and you can have fiscal policy fully funded by new money creation without any debt creation, because there won't be any debt. So things like that can be done, but we need to see whether Japan or in other countries, whether there's the political will to do this.
Talking about the current crisis, we've seen now moving from the financial sector contagion into what we might call the real economy. Just in the last couple of weeks, we've seen Japanese electronic makers shed tens of thousands of jobs. So the impact of this is very real, particularly as we look at Japan and the more flexible job market that we've seen created over the past decade or so. How are companies going to deal with this? How are Japanese companies going to deal not just with the downturn in Japan, but globally? What type of policies, strategies can they put in place?
Yes, well, it's been the goal of Bank of Japan policies since the 90s to implement structural reform like that, including especially of the labor market, to make it more flexible. And therefore, Japanese companies in this renewed tightening of the screws and renewed downturn will be able to take advantage of this new flexibility in the labor market. So as the Bank of Japan had planned, because of this policy, there'll be more layoffs of staff and therefore more unemployment, which is really the goal of a flexible labor market in this set of circumstances. So that's what we'll get.
Whether that's what we want or not, I suppose, is a very different question.
It's what those who demand structural reform towards deregulation, liberalization and privatization want. Whether that is what we should really do is another question.
And I wonder if you get the sense that there's a growing questioning of that mentality, the policies that have flowed from that we've seen emerge in Japan, particularly in the past decade, particularly under Koizumi, whether we'll see retrenchment, stepping back from that. In other words, I wonder how far this experiment with implementing more, let's say, Anglo-American style capitalism management policies, whether we'll see some stepping back from that.
Well, there's the hope that this will happen, but so far it seems that the decision makers are quite entrenched in their thinking, although the old thinking, neoclassical deregulation, Washington consensus policies have really been discredited, in fact disproven by the reality of what has happened the past few years worldwide. It's still the only pattern of thinking they have, it seems, and alternatives are being suggested only by politicians who are more connected to grassroots, the public, who listen to what people say, but unfortunately that still tends to be the exception. But it is the hope, and I do hope that people will finally begin to learn from history and from economic experience and abandon an economics that is totally unrealistic and useless for the sort of economic reality we have on this planet.
So do you see, for example, the emergence of some alternatives from the East Asian and the Japanese experience, and these alternatives may be becoming more attractive as we look around the world, as we search for new ways forward, particularly thinking of sort of closer regulation of the banking sector that we've traditionally seen in Japan and elsewhere. Is it then back to the future?
That certainly would be the rational conclusion, because if you look at the facts, then it's clear that the East Asian economic systems, and there are clear similarities and clear features one can identify in contrast with the model propagated in the US in particular. That system has been quite successful in delivering what really matters to people: stability, growth, if you want. You can change the target from mere GDP output growth maximization to environmentally friendly growth with the same system quite easily. It is a system that's able to deliver whatever target you set. And it is quite an efficient system, which is exactly why the Bank of Japan was told by its backers and friends to destroy it. But it's proven to be quite resilient, and this global downturn now is really a chance, another chance, second chance for the Asian miracle model to be looked at. So I hope that's going to happen.
Well, finally, maybe if I may, working in business schools, management schools as we do, what's your message to our students, looking at the situation now, looking at your analysis of this, and thinking about the next generation of managers going forward? What can we be teaching them? What can we be advising them?
Well, students have to learn to be very critical, and that's one thing they should realize, that that a lot of things have been taught, probably not at Doshisha, but at some business schools, that were not really accurate, especially in the area of economics. And students should learn from this, and we as the teachers should also impart to students this realization and teach them critical thinking. For decades, governments have propagated the need to deregulate, liberalize, and privatize, and virtually all the policies of the last 20 years of the G7 governments have been based on this paradigm, on this ideology, which has completely collapsed and has been completely disproven. So that's quite an extraordinary event, and students should realize, well, what these famous thinkers say may actually not be true. So they should think for themselves, and that's definitely one lesson to learn.
Well, thank you very much for your time and for these discussions. Thank you.
Thank you.